Lieutenant Zara Voss had seen alien technology that could reshape matter with a thought, witnessed beings who communicated through quantum entanglement, and survived battles where energy weapons turned mountains to glass. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for what she discovered when she finally confronted the mysterious pilot who had been saving human lives across 3 star systems. Because the truth wasn't just stranger than fiction, it was impossible. What happens when the galaxy's most feared species discovers that humans don't just survive against impossible odds, they thrive on them? What happens when an alien warrior realizes that the primitive mechanic who's been fixing her ship possesses abilities that could reshape the balance of power in the universe? And most importantly, what happens when that mechanic has been hiding in plain sight all along? This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became the galaxy's most terrifying strength, and how one chance encounter between enemies revealed that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who never intended to hunt at all. Get ready to discover why the rest of the galaxy whispers one phrase in their native tongues when humans are mentioned. Humanity. D7, 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 defiance meant one thing. They were all about to die. Lieutenant Zara Voss pressed her back against the bulkhead as another blast from the pursuing Kethmoran dreadnought shook the ship like a toy in the hands of an angry child. The lights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces of her squad as they huddled in the cramped maintenance corridor. 23 souls remaining from what had been a crew of 200 when they'd started this mission 6 days ago. Status report, she whispered into her comm, though she already knew the answer would be grim. Main engines are offline, came the crackling response from Chief Engineer Martinez somewhere in the bowels of the ship. Life support is running on backup power. We've got maybe 40 minutes of breathable air left, and that's if we don't move around too much. Zara closed her eyes and tried to think. 6 days ago, their reconnaissance mission to the edge of Kethmoray space had seemed routine. Observe enemy troop movements, gather intelligence, get out clean. Nobody had mentioned the fleet of 12 dreadnoughts that had been lying in wait, or the fact that their supposedly undetectable stealth coating had apparently been about as effective as painting a bullseye on their hull. The Kethmoran were the galaxy's apex predators, 8 feet tall, built like armored tanks, with reflexes that made human special forces look like sleepwalking children. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity had developed, and their philosophy was simple. Kill everything that wasn't Kethmoran, then kill anything that might one day become a threat to the Kethmoran. Another explosion rocked the ship, and Zara heard something expensive break several decks below. Through the small porthole next to her head, she could see the massive bulk of the pursuing dreadnought, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Red targeting lasers swept across their position like the eyes of some vast predator. "Lieutenant," whispered Corporal Chen, the youngest member of her squad at barely 19 years old. "Are we going to make it home?" Zara looked at the kid's face, saw the fear there mixed with a stubborn determination that reminded her why she'd joined the military in the first place. Humans didn't give up, even when faced with impossible odds. Even when every rational calculation said they should surrender or run or curl up and die, humans found a way to keep fighting. "We're going to make it home," she said, and she meant it. The problem was, she had absolutely no idea how. That's when the impossible happened. A new ship appeared on their sensors, dropping out of hyperspace directly between the Defiance and the pursuing dreadnought. Zara caught a glimpse of it through the porthole and felt her breath catch. It was sleek, angular, clearly alien in design, but unlike anything in their databases. The hull seemed to shimmer with an opalescent quality that made it hard to focus on, as if light itself couldn't quite decide how to interact with whatever materials it was made from. "Unknown vessel," came the harsh, guttural voice of the Kethmoran commander over the emergency frequencies. "You are interfering with a legitimate military operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." For a moment, there was only silence. Then a new voice came across the comm channels, and Zara felt something cold crawl down her spine. The voice was clearly alien, but unlike the Kethmoran's brutal growl, this was musical, almost hypnotic. It spoke in perfect galactic standard. Negative Kethmoran vessel. The humans are under my protection. The words hung in the vacuum of space for exactly 3 seconds. Then the unknown ship opened fire. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from the mysterious ship, but these weren't the crude plasma bolts or particle beams that most species used. These were something else entirely, weapons that seemed to bend the very fabric of space-time around them. The first shot punched through the dreadnought shields like they weren't even there. The second carved a hole clean through the ship's primary hull. The third detonated the main reactor. The explosion was visible for 3 light minutes in every direction. "Holy shit," someone whispered over the comm, and Zara realized it had been her. The unknown ship turned toward them, and for a terrifying moment, Zara thought they were about to be destroyed by their mysterious savior. Instead, a gentle tractor beam locked onto the Defiance and began pulling them toward what appeared to be a docking bay. "Unknown vessel. This is Lieutenant Zara Voss of the United Earth ship Defiance. Please identify yourself." The musical voice came back immediately. "You may call me Thyriash, Lieutenant Voss. Your ship requires repairs and your crew requires medical attention. I will provide both. Why are you helping us?" There was a pause, and when the voice came back, there was something almost like amusement in it. "Because someone very important to me would be quite upset if I allowed humans to die when I had the power to prevent it." The docking process was unlike anything in Zara's experience. The alien ship seemed to open like a flower, revealing a bay that was impossibly larger than the external dimensions should have allowed. Gravity fields guided them in with a precision that human technology couldn't match, and the moment their ship settled onto the deck, Zara felt the atmosphere around them shift as breathable air flooded back into their systems. "All crew to prepare for boarding," she announced over the internal comm. Standard first contact protocols. Weapons visible but not drawn. "Remember, whoever this is just saved our lives." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Zara got her first look at their savior. Thyriash was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that held the same opalescent quality as her ship's hull. Her features were vaguely humanoid but refined to an almost ethereal degree, as if someone had taken the concept of beauty and perfected it beyond anything nature had ever produced. She wore what appeared to be a form-fitting bodysuit that seemed to be made of liquid metal, and her eyes were the color of distant stars. She was also quite obviously armed with weapons that could probably level a city block. "Welcome aboard the Stellarthus," she said, her voice carrying that same musical quality in person. "I apologize for the dramatic rescue, but the Kethmoran are not known for their patience." Zara stepped forward, acutely aware that she was covered in sweat, blood, and 6 days' worth of accumulated grime. "Thank you for saving us." "I'm Lieutenant Voss. Who are you exactly?" Thyriash's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that might have been amusement. "I am what your species would call a freelance pilot. I travel the galaxy, and sometimes I find myself in positions where I can help those in need." It was obviously not the complete truth, but Zara decided that questioning the motivations of someone who had just vaporized a Kethmoran dreadnought was probably not the wisest course of action. "Our ship is badly damaged," she said instead. "We need to get word back to Earth about the Kethmoran fleet positions we observed." "Your ship will be repaired," Thyriash said, "but it will take time. My medical bay can treat your wounded, and my crew quarters can provide rest for your people." "Crew quarters?" Zara looked around. "How big is this ship?" "Large enough," Thyriash replied cryptically. "Come, let me show you to your accommodations." As they walked through corridors that seemed to bend and flow in ways that hurt to look at directly, Zara found herself studying their host. Everything about Thyriash spoke of advanced technology and capabilities that were far beyond anything humanity had achieved. Her movements were too graceful, too precise. Her ship was too powerful, too sophisticated, and yet there had been something in her voice when she'd mentioned someone being upset if humans died. "The crew quarters are through here," Thyriash said, gesturing to a section of wall that suddenly irised open to reveal a corridor lined with doors. Each room is equipped with environmental controls suited to human physiology. The medical bay is 3 doors down on the left. My engineer will begin repairs on your vessel immediately." "Engineer?" Zara asked. "I thought you said you were a freelance pilot." Something flickered across Thyresh's face, an expression too quick to interpret. "I have. Assistance when needed. Rest now, Lieutenant. Your people have been through an ordeal." It wasn't until Zara was alone in a room that was more luxurious than anything she'd ever seen that she realized what had been nagging at her about their rescuer. For all of Thyresh's obvious power and advanced technology, for all her ethereal beauty and mysterious nature, there had been something almost familiar about her. Something in the way she moved, the way she spoke, that reminded Zara of someone. She just couldn't figure out who. Outside her room, she could hear the distant sounds of repairs being conducted on the Defiance. Whoever Thyresh's engineer was, they were working fast. Too fast, if Zara was being honest. The damage they'd sustained should have taken weeks to repair, even in a fully equipped shipyard. But the sound she was hearing suggested that the work was progressing at an impossible rate. She was still puzzling over this when exhaustion finally overtook her and she fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. Her dreams were filled with musical voices, opalescent lights, and the nagging feeling that she was missing something important. Something that was right in front of her, if only she knew how to look for it. Something about the way Thyresh had said that someone would be upset if humans died. Someone important to her. But who could possibly be important to an alien with technology that could destroy Kethmoran dreadnoughts like they were made of paper? The answer, when it finally came to her 3 days later, would change everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. And it would start with the realization that sometimes the most important person in someone's life is the one you'd never expect. Sometimes it's the one who's been hiding in plain sight all along. Sometimes it's the one who fixes things, even when those things seem completely beyond repair. Even when those things are people. Even when those people are supposed to be nothing more than primitive aliens who had the audacity to exist in a galaxy that had already decided they were too dangerous to live. But that revelation was still 3 days away, and for now, Zara slept peacefully in a bed provided by an alien whose motivations were as mysterious as her technology. Outside in the engineering bay of the Stellar Thieves, repairs continued at an impossible pace. And in the depths of the ship, in a section that Thioresh had not mentioned to their human guests, someone worked with their hands in ways that defied every law of physics the galaxy thought it understood. Someone who had been waiting for this moment for longer than any human would believe possible. Someone who was about to change the course of galactic history with nothing more than a wrench and an unshakable belief that every broken thing deserved a chance to fly again. The Kethmoran thought they understood the threat that humanity posed. They were wrong. They were so very catastrophically wrong. Zara woke to the sound of her ship humming, not the death rattle she'd fallen asleep to, not the groaning protests of metal pushed beyond its breaking point, but the deep, healthy thrum of a vessel in perfect working order. She sat up in the impossibly comfortable bed, disoriented. Through the transparent wall of her quarters, she could see the Defiant sitting in the alien docking bay, and something was very wrong with what she was looking at. Her ship looked new, not repaired. New. The hull plating that had been scorched and twisted by Kethmoran weapons now gleamed like polished silver. The sensor array that had been completely destroyed was not only intact but appeared to be upgraded with components she didn't recognize. Even the paint job looked fresh, though she was certain they'd never told anyone what the original colors had been. She dressed quickly and made her way to the docking bay, where she found Chief Engineer Martinez standing beneath the Defiance with his mouth hanging open. "Chief," she called out, "report." Martinez turned to look at her, and his expression was that of a man who just watched the laws of physics pack up and leave for vacation. "Lieutenant, I've been working on starships for 15 years. I've seen emergency repairs, I've seen miracles of jury rigging, and I've seen maintenance crews work around the clock to get a ship space-worthy again." He gestured at the Defiance. "This isn't any of those things. This is impossible." Zara followed his gaze. Up close, the transformation was even more dramatic. She could see that not only had the damage been repaired, but improvements had been made. The engine housing was sleeker, more efficient. The hull seemed to have been reinforced in ways that would have required a complete rebuild. Most impossibly of all, she could see that their weapon systems had been upgraded with technology that wasn't in any human database. "How long was I asleep?" she asked. 8 hours, Martinez said. "Lieutenant, 8 hours ago this ship was held together by hope and prayers. Now it's—" He paused, struggling for words. "It's better than when it left the shipyard." A soft sound from above made them both look up. Thyraish was descending from an upper level on what appeared to be a platform of crystallized light. She landed gracefully on the deck, and Zara noticed that her expression seemed almost nervous. "Lieutenant Voss," she said, that musical voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "I trust you slept well? Who did this?" Zara gestured at her ship. "Who repaired the Defiance?" "My engineer," Thyraish replied, but there was something evasive in her tone. "He is quite skilled." "I'd like to meet him," Zara said. "To thank him." The nervousness in Thyrish's expression intensified. "That may not be appropriate." "He is very focused on his work. Doesn't like to be disturbed." Zara felt her instincts kick in. Something was wrong here. Not dangerous wrong necessarily, but definitely strange. In her experience, people who could perform miracles didn't usually hide from gratitude unless they had a very good reason. "Nevertheless," she said, letting her voice carry the authority of command, "I insist." For a long moment, Thyrith just stared at her. Then something that might have been resignation crossed her features. "Very well," she said. "But please remember that what you are about to see may be difficult to accept." She led them through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves as they walked, past rooms filled with technology that hummed with barely contained energy. The deeper they went into the ship, the more Zara began to notice something odd about the background noise. Beneath the sophisticated hum of alien machinery, she could hear something that sounded almost like music. Someone was humming something that sounded distinctly human. They stopped outside a door that looked no different from any of the others they'd passed, except that the humming was definitely coming from inside. Tharish placed her hand on a crystalline panel, and the door dissolved into motes of light. "Marcus," she called into the room beyond, "we have visitors." The humming stopped abruptly, followed by what sounded like something heavy being dropped. Then a voice came from inside the workshop, and Zara felt her world tilt on its axis, because the voice was human. Just a minute," it called. "Let me just clean up a bit." Zara stared at Thyrashev, who had developed a sudden interest in the floor. "You have a human engineer?" "It's complicated," Thyraish said. The workshop door expanded to allow them entry, and Zara stepped through to find herself in a space that belonged in no alien vessel she could imagine. The technology was clearly advanced, tools that seemed to bend reality around their edges, workbenches that floated in mid-air adjusting themselves to optimal heights. But scattered among all this impossibility were touches that were unmistakably human. A coffee mug sitting on a quantum resonance calibrator, a photo of Earth taped to what appeared to be a dimensional flux monitor, and sitting in the middle of it all, a human man in coveralls that had seen better days. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with brown hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and a face that was pleasant in an unremarkable way. His hands were stained with some kind of luminescent fluid, and he was holding what looked like a wrench made of crystallized starlight. "Hi," he said, and his smile was sheepish. "I'm Marcus Chen." The surname hit Zara like a physical blow. She turned to look at Corporal Chen, who was staring at the man in the coveralls with an expression of complete shock. "Dad?" the 19-year-old whispered. Marcus Chen's face went through several emotions very quickly: joy, guilt, fear, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "You've grown. You're dead," Corporal Chen said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You've been dead for 10 years. Your transport was destroyed by pirates when I was 9 years old." Marcus set down the impossible wrench and took a step toward his son, then stopped when the young man backed away. "It's a long story," he said. "Then start talking," Zara commanded, her lieutenant's voice cutting through the emotional tension in the room. Because I'm having trouble understanding how a human engineer who's supposed to be dead is working on an alien ship that just repaired my vessel using technology that doesn't exist. Thyreish moved to stand beside Marcus, and Zara noticed for the first time that their body language spoke of a relationship that went far beyond pilot and crew member. The way Thyrish's hand briefly touched Marcus's shoulder, the way he leaned slightly toward her without seeming to realize he was doing it. The transport was attacked, Marcus said, but I wasn't killed, I was rescued. By her? Zara nodded toward Thyrish. By me, Thyreish confirmed. His vessel was badly damaged, all aboard were presumed dead. I arrived too late to save most of the crew, but Marcus was still alive. Barely. So you saved him. That still doesn't explain why he's been missing for 10 years, or how he's able to repair ships using technology that's centuries ahead of anything humans have developed. Marcus and Thyrish exchanged a look, and Zara realized that they were having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, Marcus sighed. Because I'm not just using her technology, he said. I'm improving it. He walked over to one of the floating workbenches and picked up a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from parts of a dozen different machines. Some of the components were clearly alien in origin, but others? Is that a human plasma coil? Martinez asked, his engineer's eye identifying components that Zara couldn't begin to understand. Modified, Marcus said. I replaced the resonance matrix with a quantum entanglement array and bypassed the containment field limitations by introducing a recursive feedback loop. Martinez stared at him. That should be impossible. The energy requirements alone would overload any conventional power source, yes, but if you route the excess through a crystalline lattice and use the overflow to create a miniature dimensional fold, Marcus gestured at the device in his hands and it began to emit a soft humming sound. You get about 30% more efficiency than the original alien design. The room fell silent except for the humming of the modified device. Zara found herself staring at a man who was casually discussing improvements to technology that humanity wasn't supposed to understand for another century. How? She asked. Marcus shrugged. It just makes sense to me. Always has. When I was a kid, I could look at any piece of machinery and see how it worked, see how it could work better. My parents thought I might become an engineer, but even the most advanced human technology felt limited, like it was only scratching the surface of what was possible. He gestured around the workshop. When Thyra rescued me and I saw real advanced technology for the first time, it was like coming home. I could see the potential in everything, see how all the pieces fit together in ways their original designers never imagined. He's being modest, Thyrahesh interjected. Marcus doesn't just understand technology, he improves it. The weapon systems that destroyed the Kethmoran dreadnought, Marcus designed those. The engines that allowed us to reach you in time, Marcus built those. The medical bay that healed your wounded crew members, Marcus created that. Corporal Chen, who had been standing frozen since recognizing his father, finally found his voice. You could have come home. You could have sent a message, let us know you were alive. Mom died thinking you were dead. I grew up thinking you were dead. The pain in Marcus's expression was immediate and overwhelming. I wanted to. God, David, I wanted to come home more than anything. But how could I? What would I tell people about where I'd been, what I'd learned? And more importantly, he looked at Thyreish, and Zara saw something in his expression that made her understand another piece of the puzzle. You fell in love with her, she said quietly. She saved my life, Marcus said. Not just from the pirate attack, from a lifetime of feeling like I never quite fit anywhere. Here, with her, I can be who I'm supposed to be. I can build things that matter, that can make a difference on a galactic scale. And you can hide from the responsibility of being human, Corporal Chen said, and there was anger in his voice now. You can pretend that your family doesn't need you. Marcus flinched as if he'd been slapped. It's not that simple, isn't it? Zara stepped forward, her command instincts taking over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living a fantasy while your species is fighting for its survival against an enemy that wants to wipe us out of existence. She gestured at the impossible technology surrounding them. You have the ability to advance human technology by centuries. You could give us weapons that could stand against the Kethmoran, ships that could protect our colonies. Instead, you're playing house with an alien and letting your own people die." The anger that flashed across Marcus's face was immediate and intense. "You think I don't know about the war? You think I don't know that humans are dying while I'm out here? Every day I see the reports, every day I watch the death tolls climb, and every day I have to live with the knowledge that I could help but that my help would destroy everything I care about." "What do you mean?" Martinez asked. Marcus walked over to another workbench and picked up what appeared to be a standard human datapad. But when he activated it, holographic displays sprang up around it, showing schematics and technical readouts that were far beyond anything in human databases. "I mean that if I went back to Earth and shared what I've learned, humanity would become the most powerful species in the galaxy within a generation. We'd have ships that could travel between star systems in hours instead of weeks. We'd have weapons that could crack planets. We'd have technology that would make the Kethmoran look like children playing with sticks." He turned to look directly at Zara. "And within 2 generations, humanity would become exactly what every other species in the galaxy fears we might become. Conquerors, the thing that kills everything else just because it can." The workshop fell silent except for the soft humming of alien machinery. Zara found herself staring at a man who had been given the power to save his species and had chosen not to use it because he was afraid of what his species might become. "That's not your decision to make," she said finally, "isn't it?" Thiraeus spoke for the first time since the conversation had begun. Marcus has seen what advanced technology can do to a species. He's seen civilizations that developed too much power too quickly and used it to destroy themselves or others. He's trying to protect humanity from that fate. "By letting us die slowly instead of quickly?" Corporal Chen's voice was filled with bitter laughter. "That's not protection. That's cowardice." Marcus's shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked much older than his 30-something years. "Maybe it is, but it's the choice I made, and I've been living with the consequences every day for 10 years. Zara studied the man in front of her, this human who had been given impossible gifts and had chosen to hide from the responsibilities they carried. She thought about her crew, about the ships that had been lost to Kethmoran weapons, about the colonies that had been glassed from orbit. Then she thought about what Marcus had said about humanity becoming conquerors, and she realized that both of them might be right. "There might be another way," she said slowly. Marcus looked up at her, hope and wariness warring in his expression. "What do you mean?" "You're afraid that giving humanity advanced technology will turn us into monsters? But what if you could give us just enough to level the playing field? What if you could help us defend ourselves without giving us the power to destroy others?" "It doesn't work that way," Marcus said. "Technology isn't good or evil, it's what people do with it that matters." "Then maybe," Zara said, "it's time you came home and made sure people do the right thing with it." The silence that followed was broken only by the humming of impossible machines and the sound of a father and son staring at each other across 10 years of loss and pain. Outside the workshop, the repaired Defiance waited to carry its crew home. Inside the workshop, a choice was being made that would determine the fate of 2 species and the balance of power in a galaxy that had already decided humanity was too dangerous to live. Marcus Chen looked at his son, then at the woman he loved, then at the technology that surrounded him, and for the first time in 10 years, he began to think about going home. The decision wasn't made in the workshop surrounded by impossible technology. It wasn't made during the heated arguments that followed, or during the tearful reunion between father and son that Zara discreetly retreated from. The decision that would change the course of galactic history was made 3 hours later in Thiraeus's private quarters when Marcus Chen finally asked the question that had been haunting him for a decade. "What if I'm wrong about humanity?" Thiraeus was sitting at what appeared to be a window, though Zara suspected it was actually a sophisticated holographic display showing the starfield outside. Her opalescent skin seemed to glow in the light of distant suns, and her expression was thoughtful. "You are not wrong," she said quietly. "Humanity is dangerous. Perhaps the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever produced. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Then why did you suggest I consider going back? Thyra turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but something close to it. Because, she said, something is coming that makes the Keth Moran look like a minor inconvenience. And when it arrives, the galaxy is going to need every advantage it can get. The holographic display shifted, showing a region of space that Marcus didn't recognize. Star systems arranged in patterns that seemed almost geometric, too perfect to be natural. The architects, Thyra said, and her voice carried a weight that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. They are returning. Marcus had heard whispers of the architects during his travels with Thyrish. Legends, really. Stories of an ancient race that had shaped the galaxy according to their will, creating star systems and moving entire civilizations like chess pieces. Most species considered them myth, a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking too much power. They're real? He asked. They never left, Thyresh replied. They simply withdrew. To watch. To wait. To decide whether the younger species were worthy of continuing to exist? She gestured at the display and the view zoomed in on one of the star systems. Marcus could see massive structures orbiting the stars, constructions that dwarfed anything any current civilization had built. They have been monitoring our development for millennia, measuring our progress, evaluating our potential, and recently they have decided that we have failed their test. What kind of test? The test of wisdom. The test of whether intelligence and technology can coexist with restraint and morality. The Keth Moran's expansion, the constant wars between species, the destruction of entire worlds for resources. Thyraisha's voice was sad. We have shown them that we are not worthy successors to their legacy. Marcus stared at the impossible structures on the display. What happens when a species fails their test? They are corrected, guided to a more appropriate level of development, or if they are deemed irredeemable, they are removed entirely. The cold in Marcus's stomach spread through his entire body. Removed. The galaxy is vast, Marcus. There have been many civilizations that reached for the stars before ours. The architects have been making these decisions for longer than any of us can imagine. Marcus thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had no idea that their existence was being evaluated by beings with the power to reshape star systems. How long do we have? Unknown. But their scouts have been detected in several systems. My people estimate that the architects will begin their corrections within the next standard year. Your people. Marcus seized on the phrase. Thyra, who are you exactly? I know you're not just a freelance pilot. Thyra was quiet for a long time, staring out at the stars. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I am what your species would call a refugee. My people were one of the first to be evaluated by the architects. We did not pass their test. Marcus felt his world shift again, the same disorienting sensation he'd experienced when he'd first realized that the technology around him was far more advanced than anything humanity had developed. What happened to your people? Those who submitted to the architect's corrections were allowed to survive, but at a reduced level of civilization. No advanced technology, no space travel, no expansion beyond their home system. They live peaceful, simple lives under architect supervision. She turned to look at him and he saw pain in her eyes that was older than anything he'd ever witnessed. Those who resisted were eliminated. I am one of perhaps 100 survivors from a civilization of billions. Marcus reached for her hand and she allowed him to take it. Her skin was warm despite its alien appearance. How long have you been alone? Not alone, she said, squeezing his hand. Not since I found you, but before that, 3,000 years. The number hung in the air between them like a physical weight. 3,000 years of isolation, of being the last remnant of a dead civilization, of carrying the knowledge that her entire species had been judged and found wanting. Is that why you saved me? Because you were lonely? Initially, perhaps, but as I came to know you, as I watched you work with technology that should have been impossible for your species to understand, I began to hope. Hope for what? Hope that perhaps the architect's judgment could be wrong. Hope that intelligence and technology could coexist with wisdom. Hope that a species could be dangerous and still be worthy of survival. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, seeing what humans do when they have access to advanced technology. In part, yes, but also because I love you, and I wanted to give you the tools to build whatever your heart desired. She stood and walked back to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the starfield. What I discovered is that you at least have the wisdom to recognize the responsibility that comes with power. You could have built weapons capable of destroying star systems, but instead you built healing tools and defensive systems. You could have used your knowledge to make yourself rich and powerful, but instead you chose exile to protect your species from its own potential. And that's enough to convince the architects that humanity deserves to survive? No, Narration said bluntly. One example is not enough, but it suggests that humanity might be different from the other species they've evaluated. It suggests that you might be worth taking a risk on. Marcus felt a weight settling on his shoulders that was heavier than anything he'd ever carried. You want me to go back to Earth, to share what I've learned. I want you to go back and show your species that power and wisdom can coexist. I want you to help them prepare for what's coming, and I want you to prove to the architects that humanity is worthy of survival. And if I can't, if humanity uses what I give them to become conquerors, then they will be judged accordingly, and the galaxy will be corrected. Marcus walked over to join her at the window. Outside, the stars seemed cold and distant, indifferent to the struggles of the species that lived beneath their light. There's something else, Narration said quietly. Something I haven't told you about the architect's evaluation process. What? They don't just judge species in isolation, they judge them in context. How a species behaves when faced with extinction, when their survival is threatened, when they have to choose between their own interests and the greater good. Marcus felt understanding dawn like a cold sunrise. The Keth Moran. The Keth Moran expansion isn't random aggression, it's a test. The architects allowed them to become powerful enough to threaten other species, to see how those species would respond, whether they would unite in common cause or tear each other apart fighting for individual survival. And humanity? Humanity is failing that test. Your species is fighting bravely, but you're fighting alone. You haven't sought alliances, haven't tried to unite the galaxy against the common threat. You're proving to the architects that when faced with extinction, humans think only of themselves. Marcus stared out at the stars and thought about the implications of what she was telling him. The Keth Moran weren't just an enemy to be defeated. They were a test to be passed, and humanity was failing it by fighting alone instead of building alliances. But if I go back with advanced technology, if I help humanity become powerful enough to stand against the Keth Moran, then you change the nature of the test. Instead of proving that humanity can unite others, you prove that humanity can survive through superior firepower. That's not wisdom, Marcus. That's just another form of conquest. The weight on Marcus's shoulders seemed to double. Not only did he have to help humanity survive the Keth Moran, he had to do it in a way that proved they were worthy of survival. He had to find a way to give them strength without making them conquerors. Wisdom without making them weak. There might be a way, he said slowly. Narration turned to look at him. What do you mean? What if I don't go back alone? What if you come with me? Marcus, no, listen. You said the architects are evaluating species in context, looking at how they respond to threats and opportunities. What if humanity's response to advanced alien technology isn't to steal it or copy it, but to form an alliance with the beings who created it? Narration stared at him. You're suggesting that I reveal myself to your government, that I offer a formal alliance between humanity and the survivors of my people. I'm suggesting that we show the architects something they've never seen before, not a species grabbing for power, but a species building bridges. Not conquest, but cooperation. And if your government decides to dissect me to learn my secrets, if they decide that one alien is a small price to pay for advanced technology, Marcus took her hands in his, looking directly into those star-colored eyes. "Then I'll be there to stop them, and if I can't stop them, then humanity doesn't deserve to survive anyway." For a long moment they stood together at the window, looking out at stars that held both promise and threat. Then Thyreash smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, Marcus saw hope in that expression. "Very well," she said. "We'll go back together. We'll show your species what alliance looks like, and we'll see if they're wise enough to choose cooperation over conquest. And if they're not, then we'll face the Architect's judgment together. All of us." 3 hours later, the UES Defiance departed the stellar thighs with its crew intact and its mission parameters fundamentally changed. Lieutenant Zara Voss carried new orders in a sealed message packet, orders that would take her ship not to the nearest human outpost, but directly to Earth. Behind them, the alien vessel shimmered and vanished into hyperspace, carrying 2 passengers who were about to gamble the fate of the galaxy on humanity's capacity for wisdom. In the depths of space, ancient sensors noted the movement of both ships and relayed the information to structures that orbited distant stars. The architects were watching, waiting to see how the newest test subjects would perform. The evaluation was entering its final phase, and for the first time in 3,000 years, one of their previous test subjects was about to request a re-examination. The galaxy held its breath. Not because it knew what was coming, but because something in the quantum foam that underlied all existence sensed that fundamental decisions were being made. Decisions that would determine whether intelligence and wisdom could coexist, whether love could triumph over fear, and whether a species that had barely learned to reach for the stars could prove worthy of keeping them. The test was about to begin in earnest, and this time humanity wouldn't be taking it alone. The emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council was called at 0300 hours Earth Standard Time in a bunker 2 miles beneath the Swiss Alps. The message that had triggered it was simple, terrifying, and completely unprecedented. Alien vessel requests formal diplomatic contact, claims alliance necessary for species survival. UES Defiance vouches for peaceful intent. Admiral Sarah Chen, David's aunt and the head of Earth's military forces, stared at the holographic display showing the impossible ship that had appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was beautiful in a way that human technology had never achieved, all flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to catch and hold light in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was also, according to every sensor in the system, more than capable of destroying every human installation between Earth and Mars without breaking what passed for a sweat. "Status report," she said to the assembled council members, politicians and military leaders who had been dragged from their beds to deal with humanity's first official contact with an advanced alien civilization. "The vessel appeared 4 hours ago at the Kuiper Belt detection grid," reported General Martinez, the Defense Council's intelligence chief. "No transition signature, no energy bloom, nothing." 1 second empty space, the next second alien ship. It broadcast the message immediately, then took up a holding position and went silent. The UES Defiance arrived an hour later, also with no transition signature. Lieutenant Voss reports that both her ship and the alien vessel experienced some kind of instantaneous travel technology. She's requesting permission to proceed to Earth with the alien delegation. Admiral Chen felt a headache building behind her eyes. 4 years of war with the Kethmoran had stretched human resources to the breaking point. Their fleets were scattered across 3 dozen systems, trying to protect colonies that were being picked off one by an enemy that outclassed them in every measurable way. The last thing they needed was another unknown factor. But according to the Defiance's report, this unknown factor had destroyed a Kethmoran dreadnought with casual ease. "What do we know about their intentions?" asked Director Walsh from the State Department. "They claim to want an alliance. They claim humanity's survival depends on it, and they claim to have information about threats beyond the Kethmoran that we're not aware of." "Threats beyond the Kethmoran?" Admiral Chen leaned forward. "What could be worse than a species that's already trying to exterminate us?" General Martinez activated another holographic display, this one showing intelligence reports from across human space. According to the Defiance's initial debrief, the alien claims that the Kethmoran expansion is being allowed by some kind of galactic authority, that it's a test of some kind. A test of what? Whether younger species are worthy of continued existence. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of air recyclers and the distant sound of someone's stomach growling. Finally, Director Walsh spoke up. That's either the most elaborate lie in galactic history, or we're in much deeper trouble than we realized. Admiral Chen studied the image of the alien ship, noting the way it seemed to flow and shift even while holding position. Everything about it spoke of technology that was centuries beyond anything humanity had achieved. "What do you recommend?" "We need more information," said General Martinez. "But we need to be careful about how we get it." "If this is some kind of elaborate trap, sir," interrupted Lieutenant Commander Torres from the communications station, "I'm receiving another message from the alien vessel. They're requesting permission to send a small delegation to the surface." "2 individuals." "Just 2. "Yes, sir." 1 alien, 1 human. Admiral Chen felt something cold settle in her stomach. Human? The message says that one of the delegation members is a human citizen named Marcus Chen. Claims to be a civilian engineer who's been working with the aliens for 10 years. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. This wasn't the silence of people trying to process impossible information. This was the silence of people who had just realized that the situation was far more complicated than they'd thought. Marcus Chen, Admiral Chen said slowly. That name is familiar. General Martinez was already pulling up records. Marcus Chen, civilian transport engineer, declared dead 10 years ago when his ship was destroyed by pirates. Survived by a wife and son. He paused, his face paling. Son is currently serving aboard the UES Defiance as Corporal David Chen. Jesus, whispered Director Walsh. The kid's father has been alive this whole time working with aliens? Admiral Chen stared at the intelligence file, trying to process the implications. A human citizen had been living and working with an advanced alien civilization for a decade. Either he was the luckiest man in galactic history, or this whole situation was far more orchestrated than it appeared. What does Lieutenant Voss report about this Marcus Chen? General Martinez consulted his datapad. She confirms his identity, confirms that he's been working with the alien pilot, and... He paused. Sir, she reports that he's responsible for repairs to the Defiance that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. Meaning? Meaning he's had access to alien technology for 10 years and has learned how to use it. Possibly how to improve it. The implications hit Admiral Chen like a physical blow. A human citizen with 10 years of experience with advanced alien technology was offering to return to Earth. Either it was the greatest intelligence coup in human history, or it was an elaborate setup for the greatest disaster. Recommendations? We have to take the meeting, said Director Walsh. If they're telling the truth about threats beyond the Kethmoran, we need that information. And if Marcus Chen really has learned to work with alien technology, then he could be the key to turning the tide of the war, finished Admiral Chen. Or he could be the key to our complete destruction if this is all some kind of elaborate trap. She stared at the holographic display for another long moment, weighing options that all seemed to lead to either salvation or annihilation. Finally, she made the decision that would change the course of human history. Grant permission for the delegation to land. But I want full military escort, full sensor sweeps, and containment protocols ready to implement at the first sign of hostile intent. Yes, sir. Where do you want the meeting to take place? Admiral Chen thought about it. They needed somewhere secure, somewhere that could be sealed off if necessary, but also somewhere that wouldn't immediately suggest that humanity's first impulse was to treat visitors as prisoners. The diplomatic facility at Geneva. Full defensive perimeter, but make it look like an honor guard, not a containment force. 3 hours later, Admiral Chen stood in the observation booth overlooking the main conference room at Geneva, watching the most important meeting in human history begin with what appeared to be a family reunion. The alien delegation had arrived in a craft that defied every law of physics that human science understood. It hadn't landed so much as materialized in the designated area, a seamless transition from empty air to solid matter that had given the sensor operators nervous breakdowns. The alien herself was stunning in a way that made Admiral Chen understand why ancient humans had invented gods. Tall, elegant, with skin that seemed to hold starlight and eyes that were older than anything had a right to be. She moved with a grace that suggested her species had been perfecting the art of existing for longer than humanity had been walking upright. But it was the human beside her that held Admiral Chen's attention. Marcus Chen looked like an ordinary man. Coveralls that had seen better days, brown hair that needed cutting, hands that were stained with some kind of luminescent fluid. He could have been any engineer from any shipyard in human space, except for his eyes. His eyes held a kind of quiet confidence that spoke of someone who had seen wonders beyond human imagining and had learned to take them in stride. The moment he entered the conference room, Corporal David Chen broke protocol and ran to embrace his father. "Dad," the young man whispered, and Admiral Chen could see tears streaming down his face. "I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." "I know," Marcus replied, holding his son tightly. "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry." The reunion was brief but intense, the kind of emotion that reminded everyone watching that beneath the geopolitical implications and military considerations, this was ultimately a story about people, about families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control and the chance to heal wounds that had festered for a decade. Finally, Marcus gently separated from his son and turned to face the assembled representatives of humanity's government. His expression was serious, but not hostile. He looked like a man who had come home to deliver news that no one wanted to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the conference room's audio systems, "my name is Marcus Chen. I know my presence here raises a lot of questions, and I promise I'll answer all of them. But first, you need to understand why we're here." He gestured to his alien companion, who stepped forward with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in their own skin. "This is Thyreish of the Stellary people. She saved my life 10 years ago, and now we're here to try to save all of yours." Director Walsh leaned forward. "Save us from what, Mr. Chen?" "From a test that humanity doesn't know it's taking. A test that, if we fail, will result in the elimination of our species." The conference room fell silent. Admiral Chen could see the various officials and military leaders trying to process what they were hearing, weighing the possibility that this was all an elaborate hoax against the evidence of technology that was clearly centuries beyond human capability. Thyreish spoke for the first time, her voice carrying that musical quality that somehow made even terrible news sound beautiful. "Representatives of humanity," she said, "I am the last free survivor of a civilization that faced the same test you are facing now. My people failed. They were given a choice between submission and extinction, and those who chose submission were allowed to live simple, restricted lives under the supervision of beings called the architects." She paused, letting the implication sink in. Those who chose extinction got their wish. General Martinez found his voice first. "What is this test you're talking about?" "The architects are an ancient race that shaped this galaxy according to their design. They have been evaluating younger species for millennia, determining whether they possess the wisdom to handle advanced technology and the power that comes with it. And if they decide we don't, then they correct the situation, either by reducing your civilization to a pre-technological state or by removing it entirely." Admiral Chen felt the room's atmosphere shift as the full weight of what they were hearing sank in. This wasn't just first contact. This was notification that humanity's existence was being evaluated by beings with the power to end it. "The Kethmoran expansion," Marcus said, taking over the explanation, "is part of that test. The architects allowed them to become powerful enough to threaten other species, to see how those species would respond, whether they would unite for the common good or fight individually for their own survival." "And how is humanity scoring on this test?" asked Director Walsh, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Poorly," Thyreish replied bluntly. "You are fighting bravely, but you are fighting alone. You have made no serious attempts to forge alliances with other threatened species. You are proving to the architects that when faced with extinction, humans think only of themselves.
Maybe because the other species in the galaxy haven't exactly been lining up to help us, Admiral Chen said, letting some of her frustration show.
Have you asked for their help? Marcus's question was quiet, but it cut through the room's defensive atmosphere like a knife. Have you even tried to contact other species that are facing the same threat? The silence that followed was answer enough. The test isn't just about surviving the Keth Moran, Tharish explained. It's about how you go about surviving them. Do you develop better weapons and use force to drive them back? Do you unite with others to present a common front? Do you find ways to end the conflict without destroying the Keth Moran themselves? What do you recommend? Admiral Chen asked. Marcus and Tharish exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that spoke of years of shared experience and trust. We recommend, Marcus said, that humanity stop fighting this war alone. We recommend that you use the opportunity we're offering to build alliances instead of just building weapons. What opportunity? Tharish stepped forward, and suddenly the conference room's lighting seemed to shift, as if her presence was affecting the very nature of reality around her. The opportunity, she said, to be the first species in galactic history to pass the architect's test not through force or submission, but through wisdom and cooperation. She gestured, and holographic displays sprang up around the room, showing star charts and technical schematics that made the assembled humans gasp in amazement. I am offering humanity a formal alliance with the survivors of my people. Not just access to our technology, but partnership in its development and deployment. Not conquest through superior firepower, but cooperation through shared knowledge. The displays showed ships that seemed more like works of art than military vehicles, weapons that could disable rather than destroy, and most incredibly of all, what appeared to be construction blueprints for massive space stations. Diplomatic platforms, Marcus explained, seeing the confusion on the assembled faces. Neutral meeting places where multiple species can gather safely. We build them together. We operate them together, and we use them to forge the alliances that will show the architects that intelligence and wisdom can coexist. Admiral Chen stared at the holographic displays, trying to comprehend the scale of what was being offered. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was a complete reimagining of humanity's role in the galaxy. And if we refuse, then you continue to fight the Keth Moran alone, Tharish said sadly. And when the architects complete their evaluation in approximately 6 months, humanity will be judged based on how it has behaved during this crisis. 6 months? Director Walsh's voice cracked slightly. 6 months, Marcus confirmed. The architects don't believe in long trials. They've been observing the galaxy's response to the Keth Moran expansion for 3 years now. They're ready to make their final decisions. The conference room fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. This was the silence of people realizing that everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was wrong. This was the silence of people facing a choice that would determine the fate of their entire species. Admiral Chen looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders, saw the fear and confusion and desperate hope reflected in their expressions. Then she looked at Marcus Chen. This ordinary man who had been given extraordinary knowledge and had chosen to come home to share it. What do you need from us? She asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the conference room, and in that smile, Admiral Chen saw something that gave her hope. We need you to be what humanity has always been best at being, he said. We need you to be the species that refuses to give up, that finds a way to make the impossible possible, and that never ever stops believing that things can be better. He gestured at the holographic displays around them. We need you to show the galaxy what humanity, FQA, really means. Outside the conference room, sensors detected the first Architect scout ship entering the outer edge of the solar system. The final phase of the test had begun. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy was about to see something it had never seen before, a species that chose cooperation over conquest, wisdom over warfare, and alliance over annihilation. The architects were watching, and they were about to be very, very surprised. 6 months later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the first galactic diplomatic platform, watching something that shouldn't have been possible: representatives from 14 different species working together to solve a problem that threatened them all. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. A massive ring structure positioned at the gravitational balance point between 3 star systems. Human ingenuity had designed the basic framework. Stellari technology had provided the advanced materials, and a dozen other species had contributed everything from atmospheric processors to quantum communication arrays. It was the sight of beings who had been killing each other for generations sitting around the same table, arguing not about territorial disputes or resource allocation, but about the best way to save a Kethmoran colony ship that was drifting dead in space. "The propulsion system is completely destroyed," reported Vextar, the reptilian representative from the Saros Confederation, "but their life support is still functional. If we can get there within the next 18 hours, we can evacuate the survivors." "My ships are fast enough to reach them in time," offered Cathara of the Avian Collective, her feathers ruffling in what Admiral Chen had learned was a sign of determination. "But I'll need escort vessels. That sector is still contested space. The Terran Third Fleet is already in the area," Admiral Chen said, consulting her tactical display. "We can provide escort and covering fire if needed." 6 months ago, the idea of human and alien ships working together to rescue Kethmoran civilians would have been unthinkable. Now it was becoming routine. The war hadn't ended exactly, but it had transformed into something entirely different. Instead of a battle for survival, it had become a test of principles. It had all started with the first diplomatic contact 3 weeks after the Geneva meeting. Marcus Chen had used his knowledge of alien technology to create what he called translation bridges, devices that didn't just convert language but conveyed emotional context and cultural meaning. For the first time in galactic history, species that had been fighting each other for generations were able to actually understand what they'd been fighting about. The results had been embarrassing for everyone involved. Most of the conflicts, it turned out, were based on misunderstandings, resource disputes that could be resolved through cooperation, and fear of intentions that had never actually existed. The Kethmoran expansion itself wasn't driven by conquest or malice, but by desperate overpopulation and a cultural imperative to find new homes for their people. Within a month, the Galactic Diplomatic Platform had hosted its first successful negotiation, a resource-sharing agreement between the Kethmoran and 3 systems that had been under attack. Instead of taking territory by force, the Kethmoran received permission to establish colonies on uninhabited worlds in exchange for sharing their advanced mining technology. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a beginning. "Admiral?" came a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Marcus Chen approaching. In 6 months, he'd gone from a missing civilian engineer to one of the most important figures in galactic politics. He was still wearing coveralls, still had grease under his fingernails, but now he also carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd help reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "Marcus, how are the negotiations going?" "Better than anyone expected, worse than we hoped." He joined her at the observation window, looking out at the fleet of ships from a dozen species that surrounded the station. "The Kethmoran delegation is actually considering the formal alliance proposal." "And the catch?" Marcus smiled grimly. "They want assurances that if they stop their expansion, other species won't use the opportunity to encroach on their existing territory. They've been burned by broken promises before." Admiral Chen nodded. It was the same problem that had plagued galactic politics for centuries. Trust was hard to build and easy to destroy, and every species carried the scars of previous betrayals. "What does Thyrea think?" "She thinks we're making progress faster than anyone has a right to expect. The fact that we're having this conversation at all is more than her people achieved before they were evaluated by the architects." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Thyreish appeared beside them. Admiral Chen still wasn't entirely comfortable with the way Stellari could move through space in ways that seemed to ignore conventional physics, but she'd learned to take it in stride. "Admiral?" Thyreish said, her musical voice carrying a note of urgency. We have detected architect activity in the outer system. Admiral Chen felt her stomach drop. For 6 months, they'd been building alliances and resolving conflicts, always with the knowledge that somewhere in the background, ancient beings were watching and judging. But the architects themselves had remained invisible, mythical figures whose existence was attested to only by stories and ancient ruins. What kind of activity? A monitoring station has been established at the edge of your solar system. They are observing the diplomatic platform, recording our interactions, evaluating our progress. Marcus turned away from the window. How long before they make their decision? Unknown. But the fact that they have established a monitoring station suggests that the evaluation is entering its final phase. Admiral Chen looked out at the ships surrounding the station, representing species that had been enemies just months ago and were now working together toward common goals. It wasn't perfect cooperation, not yet. There were still conflicts, still mistrust, still species that refused to participate in the alliance. But it was progress. The question was whether it was enough. There's something else, Thyresh said quietly. The monitoring station is not just observing. It is also broadcasting what? Information about what they are seeing here? They are sharing the results of humanity's test with other architect installations throughout the galaxy. Marcus and Admiral Chen exchanged glances. Why? Because what is happening here has never happened before. In 3 million years of evaluating younger species, the architects have never seen a test subject choose cooperation over conquest. They are intrigued. 3 days later, the answer to what that intrigue meant arrived in the form of a ship that appeared in the middle of the diplomatic platform's docking bay without any transition whatsoever. One moment the bay was empty, the next moment it contained a vessel that seemed to be made of crystallized space-time itself. The being that emerged from the ship was tall, elegant, and so clearly artificial that Admiral Chen wondered if the architects were some kind of synthetic species. Its movements were too precise, too perfect, like a machine that had been designed to appear humanoid but had never quite learned how to convincingly fake biological imperfection. It requested a meeting with the primary test subjects, which apparently meant Marcus, Thyresh, and Admiral Chen. The meeting took place in the station's main conference room, with representatives from all 14 allied species in attendance. The architects spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, using language that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the brain. I am Designate Prime, Evaluation Division, Galactic Correction Authority. I am here to deliver the preliminary results of species evaluation 47,291,847. The conference room fell silent. Even the translation devices seemed to hold their breath. Species designation, Homo sapiens, local designation, humanity. Evaluation period, 3 years, 4 months, 7 days. Test parameters, response to existential threat, capacity for cooperation, potential for responsible use of advanced technology. Designate Prime paused, and Admiral Chen realized that despite its artificial nature, the being was capable of dramatic timing. Preliminary result? Unprecedented. What does that mean? Marcus asked. It means that in 3 million years of evaluation, no species has ever responded to the test parameters in the manner that humanity has demonstrated. Previous subjects have either failed the test through aggression and conquest or passed the test through submission and isolation. And humanity? Humanity has created a new category. You have demonstrated the capacity for responsible use of power by choosing not to use power. You have demonstrated cooperation by building alliances rather than empires. You have demonstrated wisdom by seeking to understand your enemies rather than simply defeating them. Thyresh leaned forward. What is the architect's decision? The decision is not yet final, but the preliminary recommendation is unprecedented. Another pause, longer this time. The Galactic Correction Authority recommends that humanity be designated as evaluation specialists. What does that mean? Admiral Chen asked. It means that instead of being subject to evaluation, humanity would become partners in conducting evaluations. Your species would be responsible for testing future developing civilizations, for determining whether they possess the wisdom to handle advanced technology. The implications hit the room like a physical wave. They weren't just going to be allowed to survive. They were being invited to join the architects as judges of other species. There are conditions, Designate Prime continued. The alliance you have built must be maintained and expanded. The cooperative technologies you have developed must be shared freely. And the principles you have demonstrated here must be applied consistently to all future interactions. And if we refuse, Marcus asked, then you will be allowed to continue as you are with the understanding that you have passed the test and are free to develop as you see fit, but you will not be eligible for advancement to evaluation specialist status. Admiral Chen looked around the conference room at the faces of beings from a dozen different species, all of whom were staring at the humans with expressions that ranged from amazement to envy to something that might have been pride. How long do we have to decide? The decision must be made within one standard galactic year. But there is one more condition that must be met before the offer can be finalized. What condition? The Kethmoran must formally join the alliance, not as subjects or prisoners, but as equal partners. If humanity can achieve that level of cooperation with their former enemies, it will demonstrate that the principles you have exhibited here can be applied even in the most difficult circumstances. After Designate Prime departed, the conference room erupted into discussion. Some species were enthusiastic about the prospect of humanity joining the architects as galactic overseers. Others were concerned about what it might mean for the balance of power in the galaxy. All of them were amazed at a species that had been on the verge of extinction just months ago was now being offered a position among the galaxy's ruling powers. But the real test, as Designate Prime had made clear, was still to come. 3 weeks later, Admiral Chen found herself standing once again on the observation deck of the diplomatic platform, but this time she was watching a very different kind of gathering. The largest Kethmoran fleet anyone had ever seen was approaching the station, not as invaders but as potential partners. The negotiations had taken months and had required compromises from everyone involved. Territory disputes that had seemed irreconcilable were resolved through resource-sharing agreements. Colonies that had been conquered were restored to their original inhabitants, while the Kethmoran were granted rights to establish new settlements on previously uninhabited worlds. Most importantly, the underlying cause of the Kethmoran expansion was addressed through a massive population relocation program that would give their species the room they needed to grow without displacing others. "They're really coming," Marcus said, joining her at the window. "I wasn't sure they'd actually go through with it." "Neither was I," Admiral Chen admitted. "A lot of their people see this as surrender rather than alliance. And a lot of our people see it as collaboration with war criminals," Thyreish added, materializing beside them in her usual fashion. "But that is what makes this such a significant test of humanity's principles." Admiral Chen watched the Kethmoran ships approach, massive vessels that had once been symbols of terror and destruction but were now coming to negotiate peace. It wasn't going to be easy. There was too much history, too much pain on both sides. But it was possible, and that possibility was something that had never existed before in galactic history. "The architects aren't the only ones watching," she said quietly. "No," Marcus agreed. "Every species in the galaxy is watching to see if it's actually possible for former enemies to become allies. And if we succeed, then we change the galaxy, Thyra." She confronted the alien pilot, only to find the human mechanic behind her survival. HFY Sci-Fi tale.